Udhbav Bharadwaj from Enlisted Design. He's an industrial designer based in California. I'm going to let him introduce himself. And again, we're going to go through this talk. But thanks everybody who's here. I know it's late on your end, but it's early on our end. So with that, Udhbav, take it away.
Yeah. So hey everyone, my name's Udhbav Bharadwaj, industrial designer at Enlisted here in Oakland in the Bay Area. From India, but came to school or went to school, college, undergrad at University of Cincinnati. Had a couple internships in the past and started working here in June of this year. So I've been here around 6 months now. But yeah. Yeah, I'll get into the short little talk that I have. I don't know. But yeah, so can everyone see screen? Can you see screen?
Yeah, we're good. Let's go.
Cool. So yeah, talk to maybe be of assistance to all of you guys, ranging from things like the job hunt to portfolio, or just things I wished I was told earlier in design school, just take advantage of that earlier. So quick little intro. I've always had like design in my veins. My mom's a interior designer / architect. My dad's in machine design. So like I knew I always wanted, like it was always built into like me coming into the design field. It just took a while, obviously starting college to kind of get that career going. I moved to the US when I was 1, but moved back to India when I was 10. 11-ish. So I kind of got both sides of the culture, both sides of the way of life. But going to India after studying here and getting sucked into that IIT JEE engineering stuff made me not want to do engineering. So I chose the better fields because there's no studying here, well, not that much. But I initially wanted to do footwear, but once I got into design school, didn't really like sketching that much, but took more interest in CAD and rendering. And then I took inkling towards consumer electronics and home goods and that side of things. So where I've been upon like within the University of Cincinnati, the reason why I chose there is that there's a huge integration of internships into the program. Even though it is a bachelor's degree, I'm coming here much earlier than people usually do for school from India. Felt that it was a better, investment to my future, and parents sort of agreed with that. So within that, did 5 internships, 2 at Allegiant, which is kind of like a door hardware bike lock company. They have the brands like Schlage and Kryptonite. Then went to Peloton. We all know kind of do the bikes, now the rower. Then went to Huge Design, which is a consultancy here in the Bay Area in San Francisco, more focused in the consumer electronics realm. And then finally, a year ago, my last internship was at Sonos, and I started here, like I said previously, at Enlisted in June of 22. What I've learned, kind of want to go through that as to what I build on later, but in the talk. But I learned different things at each experience. So like Allegiant, the first one, kind of learning more about trend forecasting, design for mass manufacturing, and working with engineers, because that's very important in the design field. That was my first real internship, and I was a sophomore. So it was kind of like getting into the weeds really quick and kind of learning and understanding what design is and where I am kind of going to end up wanting to go. Second, I returned for many reasons, but mainly to get like a better understanding of where I was and how to take the basis that I learned in the previous internship and implement that earlier and implement that later. So focused on hard skills, sketching, rendering, trend research. Then Peloton was 4 months after that. So focused on brand application, consumer research, consumer electronics, kind of get that first consumer electronics experience. Huge Design was first consultancy job, kind of learning how to go really quick, get my idea out, understanding that your first idea might not be your best idea, but it's kind of like just to get something on paper, and you can kind of evolve that as you go with the process if you are in a time crunch. And finally, Sonos was my first corporate job. Design with engineers again, corporate ladder headaches. It helped me understand that I did not want to go into corporate kind of design so early into my career. So the 3 things I'm going to cover in this talk, things I wished earlier, quick chat about portfolios and kind of approaching the general job market, not only here in the US, but just in general. So first part, what I wish I was told on day 2 of design school. Day 2, because day 1, you're kind of lost in where you are and you can't really understand anything. But, day 2 kind of understanding like, oh, now you're in design field, or starting to be, and you can kind of take that advantage once you start going forward. So first, taking it all in. Design industry in general is kind of, and school has a lot of peaks and valleys. For some, it's easy. For some, it's hard. It's second nature to some people, and it's a foreign language that people can never understand as well. So these are the things I kind of want to have like ingrained in that kind of experience early on. Learn what isn't taught. Find the small things you love. Finding a niche is important because that's kind of what gives way to what you can kind of give way to. Is it a skill? Is it a field? Is it rendering? Is it consumer electronics? Is it medical? All of that kind of understanding early or trying to explore early is helpful in the long run because you can kind of give your way to that. Evolution is key. I think stagnating with your skill and taking and kind of feeling like I have it or making your ego come into play can kind of be the detriment to your like evolution. Just because some people can see what works, something might click initially, but as you go on, if you keep using that initial kind of understanding and things that you've learned or kind of used in internships or jobs, that can kind of, if you keep using that throughout, people can catch up to you. People you're taking advantage, not people taking up, people that you're competing with, because it is a competitive field, can kind of catch up to you. And that advantage that you had early or disadvantage that you had early can be the detriment to your success. Mentorship can come everywhere, come from anywhere. Everyone has a different experience and can offer you a chance to grow, whether that's your peers, your students, your professors. But choosing that mentorship is very important because some people can have a bad experience and that bad experience can translate towards you and you're not essentially as fresh and kind of moving or choosing what's best for you versus what's best or what worked for them. And that can kind of, everyone's different. So understanding like people have good, or some people are good mentors, some people are bad mentors, and go from there and kind of take that as you go. And there's a difference between feedback and validation. Both are definitely important, but I think understanding what is important when and who to follow or what to follow is important. Because validation in a field where we're not really given credit for anything that we do, it's a lot of like, it's a lot of tearing down. It's a lot of like, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that. So at that point, I think validation is essential just to like keep you going. But feedback and taking feedback and implementing that feedback is also essential. And all feedback is not created equal. So it's kind of like understanding as you go as to which is important at one particular point. Secondly, which I think is, I don't know, I wouldn't say the most important, but I think personally, finding the story and making the story well is one of the most important things we can do as designers, because we're not only trying to communicate what we're thinking or how we're doing something, we're trying to communicate what's best at a particular given moment. And while doing that, you need to be able to explain how you got there, why is this important, or just the nitty gritty of various things. So the way you communicate your thoughts and processes equally, if not more essential or crucial than your skill. Clear path of communication grounds your design story while also letting it to live and fly and breathe on its own. The design community is as toxic as you make it. Finding a good mentor is essential. Bad mentor can set you back. And as I said, basically, you can't, and then you can't progress in this field without putting any work yourself. Help others but get help from others, and always do your best to pay it forward in the long run, because you never know where it can come back to bite you. It can also be that just sharing with others and helping others can help teach yourself as well, and that will help you in the long run. And the way you frame your content has the ability to make or break all your design effort. Graphic design isn't our job, but bad graphic design can make the viewer not even give you a chance, whether that's in an interview, whether it's a portfolio, whether that's your presentation. Graphic styles and taste can take your content to your next level. And making a lot of friends with graphic designers and make a lot of friends with graphic designers and pick their brain. It'll pay dividends. That goes for any fields within design community or externally. It's always just keep learning, which is what I think is very important for design. Speaking of story, this is a quick snapshot of how I portrayed my capstone / thesis in my final year, kind of understanding how having a baseline story of how three completely different cultures are connected through three things, namely being to drink, to eat, and charging and having portable devices. But the point I wanted to hit is being able to communicate that within each culture and within each representation of design is important. So in the top, I have Japan and Tokyo being a forefront. So taking forward a Japanese graphic design style and imagery content. In the middle, I have Scandinavian, so having a more minimal and robust kind of like feeling of very simple execution. And finally, the Indian one, which is kind of like ornamental and kind of flashy in your face. So that kind of understanding of how these three things are different and communicating that story is very important to bring that to forefront. Because I think I think if I didn't do it this way, the work that I put in wouldn't have shown through. A lot of things would have been lost, and that communication was essential in the successful execution of this project. Finally, finding your own. Since we're in a creative field, it can be hard to distinguish yourself. Find what you like in others, learn from it, adapt it, make it your own, but don't steal. Always get inspiration from people. But since it is a creative field and there's a lot of creative thought in this overall field, try not to step on other people's toes, but you can always help and get help from others. There's not one true process. That's something I definitely wish I learned early, like having or being forced to like do certain things in the design process is kind of hard when you're not adept to those particular skills or you haven't come in with that as knowledge. So find one that works with you and make it stick. And finally, it's not about where you start. It's about where you want to, or how it's about getting to where you want to be. Reach out to people in places that you want to be at, talk to multiple people. It may not be a path that you have to follow to a T, but knowing how multiple people got to the same peaks and taking bits from each one can guide you to that same spot. In this next part, optimizing the portfolio to get the job that you kind of want. Very different to what the initial section was, but this is more of implementing those tips and things to do in order to implement that into a portfolio and eventually, get the job that you overall want. So what's the purpose of the portfolio? It's a peek into how you design. It shows how you care, what you think about, and most importantly, shows who you are as a person. It's a pre-interview, sort of like a elevator pitch as to why employers should talk to you. And it's how from the employer's side, how they can kind of predict and show how you can maybe grow into the future. The project should be something that represent you and what you like to design. Kind of like don't put portfolio projects in for things that you hate designing or don't like designing. Like, for example, I'm not adept to the medical field, so I'm never going to put a project in the medical field just so that I'm not kind of thought of as someone who does medical design. So content, all of your projects don't necessarily have to be every step of the design process. Some projects can focus on a particular skill, some can focus on your passion, but being precise and concise and short keeps the viewer engaged and reduces the amount of fluff that can accumulate in the project when you're always thinking of like, oh, what should be here? What should be here? That can add up, and making sure that content story is clear is essential. More is less when it comes to portfolio. Use your space wisely. Have your visuals curated so that you can tell a story with the words you don't have to say. People don't read. No one's going to read this. You guys are probably not reading what I'm saying from the thing. It's more of like, what is this visual? What visuals can kind of communicate the same idea, but not in such a way that the viewer can have their own perceived notions of like, oh, this is what they're talking about, but they're actually talking about something else. Flashy visuals catch a viewer's eye more than a project that has good skill. Flashy visuals, however, get you the interview, but great skill gets you hired. Your worst page represents your overall skill level. So, and one great render doesn't make up for 20 other subpar pages. Keep the baseline quality constant. Your peaks can be much higher than a constant. So if you have a very great render, very great sketch page, very great research, that can show by itself, but it always comes back down to what that lower level is of like, what's the overall vibe from this portfolio? In terms of content, this was one project that I did a couple of years ago, I think at this point, it's been a while. But kind of understanding what the user was, which is kind of where Harman Kardon as a brand currently is and what they should be aiming to be doing, because they kind of lost a lot of brand revenue. From there on, kind of creating my own visual story of like getting this inspiration from sound waves. So kind of going, since it's a sound product, kind of understanding what's the most abstract but basis understanding of what a speaker and turntable could represent. So from there, going to like 2D to 3D to sound and nature, kind of understanding the flow of things, kind of understanding like sound waves, how is that correlated to water, and kind of going through sketches. This is kind of showing my own design process of like, I like to get those flashy visuals to kind of get the story going, quick sketching to kind of get the gestural idea out and go straight to CAD. That's something that has always been my process. I've not really particularly liked diving deep in the sketch process. I like exploring in 3D. And then kind of pushing it all out with visuals, understanding the story, where's the form studies, form final, and kind of taking that and making an overall cohesive story in the whole project. So spelling it all out, communication skills are essential, not in how much English you have, or how much English you know, but how much vocabulary that you have, but in your storytelling. A project can be stellar, but if you can't explain how you got there or what your thought process was, how are they really going to understand like your project? How are they really going to know how you got there and why you got there? The 5 who, what, where, when, how, like all of that's important in this, just because we're all so individually different and everyone thinks different, essentially based off your own personal experiences. So kind of showing that all out in your portfolio is where our like grades are. Like whether you do that with words, through visuals, and eventually through the interview, that's your choice. But each project requires different needs and requirements, and understanding what those are can be all the difference that you need. So, for example, a project that's heavy into user research, that should be the focus. There should be a transition between using that research and finally to get to a product that that has a definite goal. But a project that's focused on, let's say, a computer monitor, you're kind of focused on user research, but you're more focused on the visuals and the sketching of how this particular styling is. And it goes from there. So my capstone couldn't have had the same execution as my turntable project. And understanding that difference is very important. And that's how projects can breathe on their own by themselves and help you stand out. Finally, the third kind of portion of this talk, short little thing, how to strategize your approach to the design market, not only here in the US, but pretty much anywhere, I think. Know the job. Know the job before you apply. See what work the employees have done in the past, what it currently is. You're not necessarily competing with those people, but you're kind of trying to understand what the baseline is of the particular company that you're applying for. Um, that's the kind of bar that you kind of need to aim to hit at, not necessarily the types of work, but essentially the skill. Some places like a consultancy isn't necessarily going to have a corporate portfolio. I can't necessarily apply to a medical job or UI UX job with the current portfolio that I have, and it will kind of like vary depending on what the job is. Understand the type of job you want. Are you thinking short term, long term? Do you want to work at a particular company for the long run? Right reasons, or the wrong ones? Are you working there to, work at one of those fan companies to be like, or boast to your parents or family of like, oh, I work here? Or do you actually want to work in design? Like both of those are valuable interests and points of view, and everyone has their own wishes and dreams, but yours don't have to be the same as a person next to you. And don't compete or try not to compete with the people who you're trying, who you're in your circle or not in your circle, who you're reaching out to, because you're ultimately different than who they are. Speaking of, apply for apply for jobs with work that's relevant to them. Don't apply for jobs with projects that aren't relevant. The design field in each country is different. Some focus on engineering, some focus on research, some focus on prototyping, some focus on hard skills. Each industry within the industrial design field is so different from one another. And as I said before, like the knowing that difference is very important in the long run. Coming to my experience, when it comes to getting a flashy design consultancy job, here are the few things that I think worked for me. Resume matters. When I say that, I don't actually mean like what's on it, like what's on your resume matters. I don't mean what the layout of your resume is. Your every job that you get builds on to the next one. Like I wouldn't have got my Peloton job without going to those first two internships at Legion, and then I wouldn't have got Huge, I wouldn't have gotten Sonos, and I wouldn't have come here. It's kind of like a stamp of approval from your previous jobs of like, oh, he can get here, but they've also proven of like you can do the work, you can show you have the work, but you can also prove that you can do it in a professional setting. In the end, we kind of have to prove to the employers as internationals that they have to be able to put the money where their mouth is. The not lawyer process. Visa application process takes a lot of money. It's not always successful, but in order to have this kind of approval and have companies kind of put their faith in you, that kind of matters. My personal projects showed off my interest in consumer electronics, but also showing the ability to do various other things. And I think that showed out instead of showing school projects that have the same topic. Most of my portfolio has been projects that I've actively tried to do, whether it's on the side, whether it's adapting school projects to kind of cultivate into my own kind of prompt and not be restrictive as much. I kind of showed that through, and I think that's one of the reasons. Communication skills, I like to make things look flashy, and I've tried my best to have the story be mainstay in a lot of my work, visuals, and explanation, and honing my skills, and choosing what those skills were. I knew I wanted to kind of be in the consumer tech and electronics fields from, let's say, the first internship I was at, kind of once I realized my footwear dreams were not going to happen. So chose to kind of move towards getting better at computer aided drawings, CAD, rendering. And rendering wasn't necessarily a skill that was taught at school. I don't think it's taught in most places. So it's kind of a thing of like me exploring, doing render weekly challenges, doing Instagram challenges, trying to get better, talking with people who had similar interests, and kind of getting together, getting better as a whole. And I did not want to kind of focus on my soft good skills anymore. So didn't focus on sewing, didn't focus on dye lines, didn't focus on flat packs, but kind of chose and specifically curated what I wanted those skills to be. And I think that choice helped me stand out and round out me as a college grad earlier this year. Finally, timing is everything. Right place and right time is important, especially with H-1B, like overall visa timelines. Don't lose hope. I know it's kind of hard, or you've heard it so much, but I think it's true. Like, you can't really control everything, but I think what you should do is try to control what you can, which is getting better, or keep sending those emails, keep reaching out, updating, reaching out to mentors, things like that. I think that's something you can control, and that's something that can help you in the long run. Talent can take you far, but not farther than the US Immigration Office or any immigration office if you can't get selected. All of those reasons are, a lot of them are out of our control. So again, just owning who you are. And finally, there is no guarantee of a job anywhere. I know, especially here in the US, knowing that going in can either add your stress or take it away. It depends who you are as a person. But never think that your inability to secure a visa or a job does not mean you're not good enough. With everyone, I wish everyone trying all the best. And I know it's stressful for everyone here. And hopefully everyone here will get the job and career that you have ultimately worked your entire lives to be here for. Yeah. And finally, everything on a page. It's kind of 3 different portions of this talk. But yeah, if there is anything to keep in mind, I would say, yeah, all of this. I can't really choose anything. I think these are important things. There are definitely things that so other people might say that are more important or less important. But these are things I think have definitely worked for me, and in the long run have definitely brought me to where I am currently. Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to open up to questions if people have any. Can be about anything. But yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Udbhav. This is, I was taking a lot of notes as you were speaking. And just to reiterate, visa stress is definitely real. Thanks for bringing that call out. It's not just the US, everywhere I've been, it's the same. So uh, if you are somebody who's looking for opportunities abroad, that's a part of your strategy that you just cannot control. Um, anyway, thanks for the talk. This is, I mean, I've learned something as well, and I'm gonna dive deep into a few of those topics. Maybe if you wanna stop sharing, just for everybody, I've often felt that age is not a factor, but when I look at people like Udbhav, I'm like, dude, that's insane. I feel bad about my age. Anyway, I want to get right into it. As you know, as you guys write some of your questions, I'm going to start the discussion by really getting into the first part of the topic where you talk about validation and feedback. And I want you to expand on why do you think validation is important and when is it important, as well as how do you digest feedback that maybe is not validation, maybe it's a bit negative, maybe it's a bit challenging sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I think in the long, like earlier in school, college, come in, everyone's at different skill levels, and you're kind of compared to various people. So you can be compared to the best in your class. You can also be compared to the worst in your class. And I think there's a difference between validation. I mean, not validation, but I think there's a difference between feedback from different kinds of people. There's feedback from professors who are more like, you have to do this. Why are you not doing this? I want to see more of this, but not, but more for their not necessarily personal goals or their own experience, but a more of like, this is what I want you to do, but there's no necessarily any need for it. It's because I kind of prescribed this syllabus and I want you to follow it. So I think that's one kind of feedback. That I think if you're going for the grade and if you would like the grade, definitely do that, because everyone's different. Some people focus more on the grade, some people focus on learning, and I think that's one sort of feedback. Another feedback is kind of like very helpful feedback of like, let's say it's a peer, let's say it's someone that you're actively like trying to help, or someone's trying to help you. And I think that's one kind of feedback that you should kind of take with a grain of salt. Um, and definitely don't listen to a feedback of one person. And I think I guess that's the most important thing of like trying to get feedback from people, that multiple point of view, and kind of curate things that you can do and you actively take back and reason of like, this can actually help me, versus something of like, oh, I don't like this particular font, I don't like this particular thing, I don't like why, like if there's just, because there's also feedback to give feedback, like people who are giving feedback to have their point of view, but there's no reason to have that point of, like there's no reason that they should, like they can keep their mouth shut and it's still the same overall kind of thing. So I think that's kind of why understanding what feedback or what kind of feedback is important, and how it can be taken in. I wouldn't say like feedback is like, it's always subjective, um, and that can kind of direct you in different ways. And a lot of like feedback in general, not only design, is based off personal experience. And I think what is most important, well, I keep saying it's most important, everything's important. But kind of understanding where you are, how things can implement you or help you move forward is how kind of feedback should be taken. That answer your question? I think that
I,
answered your question.
I think so. I mean, I'm curious. Did you ever seek feedback from industry professionals that you want connected with, like people on LinkedIn or maybe role models?
Yeah, so in a way, kind of. I wasn't really big, like not wasn't really big. Um, like I definitely did reach out to people, but a lot of the games in which I reached out to people, it was a lot of like, now that I understand that I'm in the industry of like, I really don't have time. So like there was a lot of that of like reaching out, and some people replied, some people didn't. But in that was more later in my college career of like, I'm actually moving into the industry field and how can I implement things to kind of help me stand out. But I think more of the feedback that I kind of reached out and kind of looked to was from my peers who are on a similar, not design level, but similar level of like experience. And then also my seniors who are like, we had like a mentorship program at Cincinnati of like 2 years above, were kind of like our mentors, we were mentees, and that kind of moved on. So that was more the feedback of getting people who are in my same spot, same kind of track, but 2 years down the line. And I think that feedback was kind of, I guess, industry professionals, just whatever. But that kind of helped me more than getting feedback from people who are not necessarily in the same position, don't have the same tools and upbringing that, not tools upbringing, but like within college, like reaching out to people who are like 20 years in the industry is kind of different than someone who's recently out of school, just because technology, they won't, like 20 years in the future, like they don't know anything about Gravity Sketch. So how are they going to help you in like, VR? So I think that's kind of that.
Cool.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of questions popping up in the chat, so I will put my thoughts a bit aside and sort of roll into some of those. The first one, maybe it's a bit related. Um, so there's a few related questions. I'm going to do my best to sort of structure them a little bit. I think this is stemming into mentorship as well, getting feedback with building a relationship in mind. How would you, let's say, approach finding a good mentor? when, let's say, you're not in a university that has a history of creating just wild talent and, people in great places and alumni network that is inspiring. So what would your
Yeah,
strategy be?
I think like definitely, I don't know, like my strategy would definitely be understand, like I think to get a good mentor, you have to know what you want in that mentor. If you're going to reach out to a mentor, like just to have some industry professional that you can kind of talk to, I don't think that's going to be beneficial to you at all. Just because um, to get knowledge from someone, you kind of have to know what that knowledge is. Like not necessarily specifically what that knowledge is, but kind of like try and get them kind of interested, not interested, but like kind of get them into the spot of like, this is why they're reaching out to me. And I think that curated reach out will be the most beneficial to all people involved. So let's say anyone here wants to work at Enlisted, like I think definitely, and you kind of have an inkling or you kind of like the work that we do and you would want to reach out to someone at Enlisted, I think that would be most like you would reach out to me because I've been here like recently. I kind of understand your path, and I think that mentorship can kind of help. And then from there, I think uh not necessarily me reaching like let's say I would reach out to people in here like here who have similar experiences, and then I could kind of keep that in contact going. So I think there's not necessarily one mentor that's good, like good per se. I think a lot of mentors would be more beneficial, but like reaching out to people who have done similar things, like let's say anyone who I don't know, went to a particular school that you went to and they're there at a spot that you're at, kind of understanding like how they went and gone like from one spot to the other. And then also kind of taking like mentorship from people who are like maybe you're trying to improve in a skill. And I think that choosing maybe a mentor who's at not necessarily the peak of where your skill is at or where your skill could be, but um, where that skill, where you want your skill to be at. And reaching out to those people would be kind of like a path to go forward. And then naturally, like there's good mentors, bad mentors, and kind of like talking is hard. Like you never know. Like people like internationally, like talking from India to here to Europe, like that's all hard. But I think understanding like methods of communication, reaching out to people again and again, don't necessarily like bore them or like annoy them. But if they're not reaching back out, maybe they're busy, like keep that communication flow going since you want that help and they don't necessarily have an inkling to get that help from you. The onus is on you to kind of keep reaching out and continue to be reaching out. Like, let's say the first mentor is like not communicative, second one isn't, but keep trying to get that. And eventually you will get a good mentor. But
I wanna dive a little bit deeper and see if we can make a quick 2 minute exercise. What if you were in
yeah,
a situation you want to reach out to a mentor and you have LinkedIn and email access? So,
yeah,
what would your email be for somebody who's looking to get into the consultancy world? You're looking to grow in terms of, let's say, positioning yourself, speaking about yourself, self branding, storytelling, a little bit of like, how do I communicate? So your communication is your aspect. So again, like let's do a quick role play.
yeah,
I'm the guy you're reaching out to. You're on LinkedIn, email.
yeah.
What would your message be?
It's like, hey, I came across your work. Love the like. I really feel with where your upbringing or how you started in design. And kind of wanted to get inner feed like have better communication or kind of get a better understanding of how you got to where you are currently. I have an interest in consumer electronics in the consultancy realm. A lot of these companies that you have worked at in the past, and also similar companies, are a goal of where I want to be at. So kind of, so I'd love to, let's say, get a coffee if we're in the same space, if we're in the same city, or have a quick Zoom call or chat of like where and kind of get a help. I would like to help or have you help me to get to where you are. And if there's any additional feedback of where my work is, or I'd love that as well. But most importantly, I think building this relationship would be beneficial to me, and I'd love to see what your thoughts are in that. So that's kind of
Awesome.
where I would kind of frame
Yeah.
overall thing. If you have a website, I would put that in, like your own personal work. So not necessarily to show what your skill level is, but kind of give them an understanding of how to give thoughts.
Yeah.
Because I think you would give me different feedback than you would give a freshman in college or someone who is like switching from engineering to design. Like it all varies, and I think it helps to have for them to have that understanding where you are.
I really like that. I feel not many people reach out knowing that they have to reach out, but it's just I don't know if it's a mental block or if it's almost nervousness and anxiety to speak to a stranger that keeps them, but they know that they want to connect, they know that they want to reach out. But it's as simple as that, just stating that, hey, this relationship at the end of the day is probably going to benefit me more than you, but a lot of designers in their position are happy to give back.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about this etiquette part of it as well. And let me actually try to pick a question from here. How would you reach out to studios and companies you want to work with? And is there a strategy that works for all, especially when jobs and internships are at stake and it's like you who's in need of something more than the company?
So the question is like kind of how to reach out to companies if they're not necessarily looking
Yeah,
for things.
let's talk about that. Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty much how I got this job. So I had like a prior like interviews and stuff in the past, but when I knew it was time to kind of look for jobs and get on the H-1B like timeline kind of thing, like almost a year ago, kind of the way I kind of approached it was I'd like a job. um, but not necessarily in that way of like, hey, I'm looking for jobs. I hope you guys have an opening. Kind of similar lines of like, um, you want to get them interested as to why they should even talk to you. So kind of having like a personality in the way you talk. Don't have the standard like, hi, this is me. Or hi, my name is. I worked here. I worked here. I worked here. I want a job. Here's my portfolio. Bye. More of like, hi, I really like your work. Maybe choose a project that they worked on. Say like, hey, I love your process in this. Don't say it just to say it. Like if you actually like it, please say it, because that can kind of that goes to forward and like in further talk of like, let's say it's an interview, you can kind of bring that up and be like kind of pick their brain a little bit more. Um, but more of like, this is who I am. This is why I think I'd be a great fit. This is why I think I can learn and actually improve not only myself, but also the company in the long run. And then also, you can't do that if your work doesn't talk for itself. Like, I don't like even like everyone here, if anyone is or any particular thing, company, let's say, has work that you don't like, or and you're hiring them for work, you're not necessarily going to hire them. Like you're not going to hire a furniture designer who makes chairs you can't sit in. So that's something that you kind of have to have all these things built together. But I don't think there's a particular way to approach each company. Maybe the customization would come from, let's say it's a project, let's say it's a person, let's say if I talk to this, let's say that is kind of like a personal kind of anecdote you can kind of add within each one. But I think the forefront is saying what your work is or showing your work, attach a portfolio, attach resume, whatever, and then also be like why you want to work at that company. It's kind of like a statement of purpose of sorts for college. And you're kind of like saying, this is why I think I should be a great fit.
Yeah, what I like about that is like it's an expected answer, right? When you think about it, how would I, without any knowledge, structure and a reach out message? And it's exactly that, like why I want to work there, what I like about you guys, and here's me. Like, do we fit together? And I've heard this question before, where a lot of students, especially Indian students, don't don't even think about like having internships and jobs abroad because they're like, but how can we? The mindset is that the Indian subcontinent is the only sort of job market for them and nobody else would. Or firstly, like, can you even apply outside? Yes, you can. Like the whole world is open. Second, it's the work that does the talking, right? Like you can put the most beautiful message, but at the end of the day, they're going to click the link, they're going to look at your work and then decide where that conversation goes, whether it ends there, whether they keep dragging it, or whether they say a yes or whatever. Um, uh, I think let's talk about portfolio now a little bit because that's where the next, the work comes into picture. A couple of questions here are sort of poking you towards personal projects. How do you first, let's say, complete those projects? Those are passion projects on the side next to your academic projects. And secondly, is there a mantra or like some sort of learning of, you know, how you sort of structure these personal projects so that not only you complete them but you convey them in the most interesting way possible, like and again, to give a little bit of context, I have often treated my personal projects a bit different from like my client projects and college projects or academic projects because I just have a lot more freedom. So I'm wondering if you have a structure for it, if there's a mindset behind it.
Yeah. So, I mean, at least personally, the way I usually structure a personal project, let's say the turntable project, for example, that kind of started as a school project, where we were kind of tasked with choosing an or giving an architect kind of design a product that they would kind of have. And it kind of ended up like 2 levels before this project of where it was. That was kind of like a 2-week, 3-week sprint. So it kind of got the idea of where that was, but I completely rewrote the story, completely rewrote everything, and kind of understood of like what skills do I want to show in this project, and also what skills are lacking that I have, or what skills do I have that are lacking in my portfolio. So at the time, I didn't have any projects that showed rendering as well as I was at that particular time. So I was like, I want to focus on rendering for this. So from there, that motivation is kind of what went through of like, I want to finish this project so I can have not only something that's like at the top of my portfolio, but also something that shows my overall design process. So it's kind of both of like, I want to show my skill, but I also wanted to be like, if there was one project to show what my skill is, what I like to do, and what my design kind of goal was, this would be that project. And I think that's what kind of like turned of like not only like in terms of internship and interviews that I was getting, but also like I growing confident of like where I am at, it's getting enough like recognition for it, and like me keep going with it. Kind of, it gives that validation of like of what we were talking earlier of like this is needed, and it's not necessarily a validation of like, oh, you're doing good. It's more also validation of what you're doing good, but also like what you're doing works, and continue doing that is kind of where I kind of structure my personal projects. But there's also those personal projects of like, I want to do this for Render Weekly prompts. And I see this cool thing uh, on Instagram, Pinterest, or whatever, and I'm like, how would I change this differently? And it doesn't necessarily have a basis to it. It doesn't necessarily have like I'm solving a problem. I'm not doing anything, but I want to show like where my design skills are, and just like um, kind of juice those skills that I'm not necessarily having at work or at school. And I think that's what personal projects are for me. Of like, let's say at work, I'm doing a lot of research, a lot of like strategy, but I really want to do rendering, and I have that inkling to render. And that's where those personal projects come in of like kind of filling in the gaps, and but also like showing where I'm at that current time.
I also feel like because you mentioned Render Weekly, it just sort of connected that the guys who started Render Weekly are also at Enlisted. So Udbhav's kind of completed the loop here through those personal projects. Now he's landed a position where Render Weekly was actually originated. And for those of you who don't know, it's pretty much an Instagram page, now a website where there's weekly prompts and they encourage you to 3D model and render design solutions and then just share it out. And I think it's more a visual library of industrial design concepts and CGI, visuals that they then curate, and they're huge now. Was there a learning in terms of as you were building your skill, did you realize like skill does, because you mentioned, did you realize that skill does most of the talking? You mentioned that you can have the talent to sort of get your foot in the door, but how do you sustain that?
Like sustain the skill or sustain like
I, I
improve.
think I think sustaining the improvement, because like you'd always want to go forward, and you also sound like a person who's constantly upskilling, and I'm wondering if there's a point that you sort of reach where you're like, after this, the extra 1% maybe doesn't add on.
Yeah, so I think at least for me, I think that depends on the person because I definitely like some like I'll speak from my personal experience. So for me, since I picked up a skill from one being bored, and being like, what can I learn that can help me stand out kind of thing. I think that kind of helped me kind of keep improving of like, I like photography, I like composition. So all of those things came together and it's like, this is something that can be my work and like it can continue kind of improving. And mainly seeing motivation from people who are much better than me at rendering of like, I want to be at where they're at, but I currently am not there. And the only way of doing that is kind of improving myself. It I definitely think like where I was like 3 years ago, I was kind of looking more to like, how can I improve this? How can I improve that? And now it's more of like, how can I refine this and refine that? So I think it transitioned from improving to refining and like learning the tips and tricks that can make it from 90% to 100%, but not necessarily putting in the same amount of work that I put in when it was from 0 to 90. So I think kind of understanding of where can I implement it and how I can implement it is kind of dictates like where I can improve that skill. But I think when it comes to sketching, I'm not necessarily as good at sketching as I am rendering. And I think once like I can definitely get better at it. And I know I can get better at it. And everyone I know knows I can get better at it. But I'm at the point where I can communicate what I'm thinking. And it's enough to where the amount of work I put in, I'm just not happy about improving that skill. And I think the happiness of improving kind of overpowers the actual eventual benefit from it.
That's actually a pretty interesting take, and I've honestly, like in my journey, just to add another perspective, I've never thought about like upskilling as having a direct relationship with happiness in the moment. But like after you get to somewhere, it does feel like, holy shit, like I feel much more empowered and confident. Like I can do this. The confidence then translates into happiness. Like I feel more proud about myself. I feel more, like I said, confident and be more open to sharing stuff. And I don't know if it's an issue, but a lot of times students who don't focus on upskilling and not really self-aware of like where they can be, they're the ones who sort of struggle with confidence issues. They kind of know that their work is not there, and then the confidence kind of is, they both go hand in hand, right? um
Yeah.
with that, I want to also ask, towards the end of the chat, but talk about self awareness a little bit, especially when, I mean, you're young. I would assume most of the audience here is also students. How do you build those muscles? How do you question yourself every day? Yeah, how do you decide what the next steps are for my journey?
Yeah. So I think for looking within, I think I have a set of people who I kind of like ask for design feedback. Whether that's at work, well, not whether that's at work because I've been here for so little. But like from school, like the people who I've trusted, kind of over 5 years of school, kind of I think that's curated like who I trust and how I know I should be getting better. But I think ultimately for me, it's more of like, do I have I think it takes a step back. I think you have to take a step back of like, I'm not the only one doing this. And there are other people who are in the same field and they also have their own experience, and kind of like not comparing not and knowing that you shouldn't be comparing people in the field in general as in terms of like a negative aspect, but knowing that there are people better than you at this. There will always be someone who is better than you at something. There will always be someone who's like comes to money richer than you. Someone's always happier than you. But there's also people who are less fortunate than you, more like, or sadder, who aren't as skilled. And I think understanding that can kind of help you yourself get better and kind of understand where you are, and know that like experience will always help you better, will always get you to a better spot. Um, but yeah, I think just understanding, like coming to the realization that you're not the best can help you get better. If ego comes into play, that's a whole different ballgame. Because that's where you can be like, I'm the best, I'm never going to improve. And I think that's where my point of stagnation is your greatest enemy, or whatever I said. I think I said that. But stagnation is detriment to your skill or evolution. And I think all of those come together of like knowing that you're not the best. And if you stay at the same spot, everything else will move away. It's like if you're in the middle of the ocean, anything that's close to you, or you will drift away from where you're supposed to be. And knowing that kind of comes into play of like getting better and kind of understanding who we are.
I agree 100%. I've in fact given this advice multiple times, just knowing that, my way of looking at it is very aggressive, where I say that, hey, you suck, I suck, you suck. We all are pretty crap at what we do. We just want to take it one step at a time and look towards not sucking, or like be less shitty at our work every day. But yeah, I 100% agree. We're towards the end of the talk. Last 3 to 4 minutes, we'll take a quick burst of questions. Let's try to keep it short. This is also like more in trend with what is happening. What are your thoughts on artificial intelligence?
Okay. So I think it's good and bad. I think from a designer aspect, I think knowing the difference of like, I think you can use artificial intelligence to generate thoughts, but I don't think those thoughts should be your ideas. I think those thoughts should be the foundation of like, let's say you're iterating on shoes and you're stuck, or like you haven't found a good idea yet, and you're yearning for that great idea, but you haven't, there's somewhere to go. And I think using artificial intelligence in those spaces is great, of like whether it's Dolly, whether it's whatever thing that you're using. I think that's a good idea. But I think the negative aspect of artificial intelligence is everyone thinking that they can design now, but and then using those designs to be like, oh, I can design, and this is something that you can't do. Because we're such in a thought and creative field, we're not being paid we're being paid for execution, but ultimately we're being paid for our thoughts and using something entirely. I definitely think that like you can use it to build off of, similar to like just talking with anyone. Like let's say you're collaborating with someone and you have an idea here and they have an idea there and you're talking with it. It can be some sort of like uh, a talking experiment, or not, or like a brainstorm. But I think that's where artificial intelligence is for me personally. Of like, it helps you. It's a tool, but you should not be overly reliant on it.
Mm. Yeah, agreed. Another quick one is, would you suggest someone taking a break from ID or their journey to work on their skill, or just to upskill? Or do you think that needs to happen simultaneously, whether that be from a job or from a college? We know about programs like Offsite as well, but what would you do if you felt that you weren't there? Would you take a break? Would you sleep less and add more work?
I think so. I think there's two sides of this. If you're on the H1, like it all comes back to visa stuff. If you're in a position to where you're able to take the time, you're not necessarily reliant on earning an income. Let's say you can live at home for a little bit. Let's say you can live with family, just things like that, and you're able to take time. I think taking that time can be beneficial to you because you're taking that little bit of time to benefit in the long run or long run. But let's say, for example, you're freshly out of school. You're not necessarily, your portfolio is not where you're at. You're not getting interviews, um, but you really want to work in the design field. I think taking, let's say, 6 months off, rebranding everything. Like nothing is sacred. You're only focusing on skills. You're trying to get better. I think that's beneficial to you because you're investing in your future self. But if it is in the case of, I hate this job, I really want a new one. I need a new one, but I don't necessarily have the flexibility of more than 90 days to kind of like improve and kind of build yourself. At that point, it would be like spend your weekends, do nothing else, spend your time after work, and then kind of build yourself then. But there's also, I think, the balance of your mental health is ultimately the most important thing of like, you can't expect your work to be 100% if your body isn't 100% and your mind isn't 100%. And at that point is where you have to toy the line yourself of where what's best for you and what's best for you in the long run of where you need to put your most effort in and how your time should be most valued.
Perfect. Let's with that, I'm gonna ask one last question. One positive thing about the design industry that you learned while as you entered it that you didn't know in college, and one negative thing that you figured out uh, in a job and in the industry which you had no idea about in college.
I'd say start off with the positive thing. The positive thing is in design school, you're kind of put into a mold and you're kind of forced to be in that mold. But in the design industry, since everyone's different and there's so many different ways to design, the flexibility of finding a place that's right for you and right for them always exists. Um, and that is always something that I wish I was told earlier. And like I think that's like been the most positive thing of like I can work here and I'm happy to work here because they follow the same kind of things that I like to do. So I'd say that's a positive thing. A negative thing, I mean, I guess the money isn't as much as computer engineering. That'd be great. Computer science, IT. I'd say the negative thing is like at least here in the US, there's not a lot of non-white designers. It's a lot of one opinion. It's a lot of, or let's say, there's not a lot of like non-white male designers in the ID industry. And I think that point of view is lost. I think since we're designing for the people, it should be made by the people, and the people represented here, like within the ID industry, it's slowly evolving to be like everyone's here in the field. But I think that the lack of representation in the design industry is what I dislike the most. Um, yeah, which is why we need all of you guys also working here, and then we can boost the people of color uh,
You
and
can
non-white.
boost the YDI stocks.
Always.
uh, Thanks, Udbhav. This is awesome. This has been a lot of fun, specifically because I see a lot of the points you mentioned, the stuff we talk about. These are all questions that I've I've had spinning in my head when I was in college, and I know for a fact that the students and younger designers have that. There's there's this difference between thinking about all these things and acting on it, and you're certainly like acting on those things. So and it's great to have this insight from not just acting and making efforts, but also your credibility now, established with the internships you've had, now with Enlisted. I hope people at YDI can take something back. I know this is very industrial design focused, but I do feel a lot of this adds value to just design practice. With that, thanks again for your time. To the audience, thanks for sticking around. I know it's late back home in India. For if you're joining us from my side of the world, hopefully it's a bright new Sunday morning. Mine is not. Mine is like really gray. We'll be doing more of these talks. We're towards the end of the year, so we'll probably not have another dialogue towards the end. But get excited for next year. Tons of new stuff coming. Udbhav is also on the server, so any questions, feel free to hit him up on the server. His handle is literally Udbhav, just goes with his first name. He's also on Instagram. We've tagged him on our Instagram, so feel free to reach out. YDI is expanding constantly. Tell your friends about us. This is going to be recorded and shared on YouTube, which I probably shouldn't have said because I'm going to record and share it and then YouTube. And you know what I mean? With that, thanks everybody for joining. This has been as fun as ever. Thanks, Udbhav, for your talk. Any closing words?
Keep designing, keep thinking, have fun.